And we all ended up being almost heroes. My name is Dave Volker. I was a captain. I was the co-pilot of 615. South departure, climb to flight level 350, navigate over Thailand and Laos. We're going to go over there to Ban Karai Pass on the border of North Vietnam and Laos and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We had a flight of 3 aircraft. It is clear above with an undercast below. The weather was very, very good. We were stacked vertically from about 35,000 feet to 36,000 feet with 500-foot separation vertically between each aircraft. And we also had about 500 feet separation horizontally. And we were 15 seconds apart. Each aircraft could carry as many as 108 500-pound bombs if that was their load. So we were starting to have problems. First thing was we only had one UHF radio, and that was immediately dangerous. As an experienced co-pilot, I needed to talk to two different basic groups that I just mentioned, and only being able to talk to one made for a really dangerous situation, because you could not hear what was going on and also give direction to the rest of the cell. We were, after all, the number 1 aircraft in the cell. Now, on the tail of the aircraft, we also had radar systems that were supposed to be able to see threats coming up behind us. And then I heard from Sid, Airman Lotka, that the radar was not working, defending the aircraft. And I read on my checklist, I said, among other things, red rotating beacons off, navigation lights dim and steady. Pilot left the anti-collision beacon on. So here we are at 35,000 feet. We're not escorted. We do not have F4s tailing us to keep the bad guys off our ass. We are out there by ourselves.
From May to October 1971, as the Vietnam flow of traffic down the trail grew markedly, the plans for Commando Hunt 7 called for USAF to bottle up the Vietnam's transport system within Laos using B-52s to close the passes leading from North Vietnam into Laos. The Vietnam added 144 miles of new roads, 344 anti-aircraft artillery batteries, new MiG base in southern North Vietnam, and dozens of SA-2 missile sites. Commando Hunt 7 operations, from November 1, 1971 to March 1972, witnessed the greatest use of B-52s. B-52s struck the Mujia, Ban Karai, and Ban Raving passes. The Ban Karai Pass was designated with B or Bravo boxes that totaled 14 by 14 nautical miles. B-52s dropped 14,400 500-pounds bombs, 17,100 750 pounds bombs. By November 4, 1971, intelligence indicated that the Mujia pass roads were already being repaired and that the flow was near normal levels. During 10 to 17 November, bombing resumed with roads were cut by B-52s. On November 9, USAF officials had to curtail B-52 operations as the Air Force intelligence first detected SAMs in the area. When the threat had been assessed, the B-52s returned to bombing on the November 20th, but once again were called off because one MiG fired a single missile at the vulnerable old B-52. B-52s returned again on 21 to 22 November for the final days of Phase 1. In early December, B-52s were withdrawn from operations around the Mujia and Ban Karai passes until March 9, 1972. Vietnam People Air Force record. Starting in 1968, the Vietnam People's Air Force, VPAF, deployed the MiG-21 to the 4th Military Region for combat readiness and experimental operations, aiming to gain practical experience in aerial engagements. The region's long and narrow terrain posed significant challenges for operational support and logistics, as airfields were frequently targeted and bombed by enemy forces. Commanding and guiding fighter aircraft became increasingly complex, constantly monitored and attacked by U.S. naval vessels. Initially, due to unfamiliarity with the terrain, MiG-21 pilots had to fly at higher altitudes to ensure their radar could detect them for guidance. However, this also made them vulnerable to American radar systems, which could easily track them and dispatch interceptors or fire missiles to shoot them down. Notably, on May 23 and June 26, 1968, Talos missiles shot down 2 MiG-21s piloted by Ha Quang Hung and Vu Ngoc Din. In response to these challenges, the regiment undertook a thorough analysis of their command structure and flight tactics. They reorganized their command protocols for directing air combat and technical flying practices. To enhance pilot training, they created topographical maps of the battlefield using clay models, enabling pilots to familiarize themselves with the local geography. They intensified low-altitude flight training and developed new interception strategies. Moreover, measures were implemented to maintain communication secrecy. For instance, during takeoff alerts, pilots were instructed not to use radio communications. Instead, they were required to remain silent during flights, with radios set only to receive mode. Coordination among fighter aircraft of the flight relied on visual signals from aircraft rather than verbal communication. Engagements would occur at close range, within 10 to 15 kilometers, at which point a pilot would use radio communication only if they spotted a target. To bolster their capabilities further, forward command posts and ground-controlled interception (GCI) systems were strengthened at key airfields such as Bai Thuong Airfield in Thanh Hoa Province, Vinh Airfield and Quan Lang Airfield in Nay An Province. Additional radar installations were also established to enhance GCI operations. Through these adaptations, the VPAF sought not only to improve their operational effectiveness, but also to counter the sophisticated tactics employed by U.S. forces in the ongoing aerial conflict over Vietnam. VPAF started studying to fight the B-52 since 1969. Pilots, navigation officers, military intelligence, and combat officers were sent to Mu Gia Pass to observe the B-52s in action with the naked eye and with TZK binoculars. A radar station codenamed C-47 was placed in Cam Chien, Ha Tin. In October 1970, a significant conference and military exercise were conducted by the Vietnam Air Force to explore strategies for safeguarding against strategic air attacks. Following the conference, the Air Force arranged a practice session to evaluate various approaches, employing IL-18 and IL-28 aircraft to simulate a B-52. These planes flew along the Cam Tui, Ton Sun Road at an altitude of 10 kilometers, providing MiG pilots with the opportunity to practice their attack maneuvers. In July 1971, the Vietnam People Air Force organized two forward command posts. Forward Command Post 1, codenamed B-3, is located in Vinh, Nay An, with one radar station. Forward Command Post Number 2, codenamed B-8, is located in Quang Trach, Quang Binh. In August 1971, B-8 deployed 3 radar stations. According to the VPAF assessment, following the MiG-21's attack attempt on the night of October 4, 1971, the B-52s temporarily halted their missions in Zone 4, operating only at a distance beyond the reach of the MiGs. About a month later, observing that there were no MiGs in Zone 4, the B-52s resumed their operations in the area. The Air Defense Command and the Air Force Command, led by Commander Dao Din Luyen, agreed to instruct Regiment 921 to relocate 2 MiG-21 aircraft to Zone 4, one to Vinh Airfield and the other 2 on Son Airfield, preparing for a potential B-52 bomber attack. To prepare for the upcoming battles, on November 19, 1971, and 2 aircraft transported pilots Bu and Tien to Vinh Airfield, and pilots Kung and Rang to on Son Airfield. During the Vietnam War, the Vietnam People's Air Force, VPAF, faced significant challenges in moving pilots between air bases, especially in close proximity to enemy forces. Thus, VPAF employed different methods and strategies to transfer pilots safely. First, using ground transport, pilots were often moved by ground vehicles, including trucks and military transport vehicles. This method allowed for discreet movement, minimizing exposure to enemy air attacks and ground ambushes. Using aerial movement. In some cases, helicopters Mi-4 or An-2 transport aircrafts were used to transfer pilots directly from one base to another, particularly when time was of the essence or when ground routes were deemed unsafe. On the morning of November 20, 1971, pilots Ngu flew a MiG-21 to Vinh Airfield and pilot Phuc moved a MiG-21 to on Son Airfield.
Although the historical books say so, pilot VU Dinh Rang said that the book is incorrect. It was he who flew the MiG-21 into Quan Lang Airfield on November 20th to be on standby that night. He flew from Phuc Yen, kept very low and far from the coast to avoid being detected by American radar. When he reached the area of Du Luong, Nay and VU Dinh Rang turned right to the west. Then upon meeting the Lam River, he turned right again to follow the river as a guide for landing.
That night, on November 20th, after a period without B-52 incursions, the Forward Command Centers B-3 and B-8 predicted that B-52s were likely to target routes 12 and 20. As a result, they placed pilot Hong Bu on alert at Vinh Airport, B-2, and pilot Vu Dinh Rang on alert at On Son Airport, B-4, ready for combat takeoff. Just as predicted, at 7:30 p.m., upon detecting B-52 activity over Savannakhet in Laos, the command center ordered pilot Hong Bu to take off from Vinh Airfield, flying into the Tan AP area near Mujia Pass at an altitude of 8,000 to 10,000 meters to conduct a diversionary mission before returning to land at Fukien Air Base. At this point, the VPAF expected that U.S. intelligence had detected the situation and concluded that there were no more MiGs operating in the airspace over Zone 4. At 8 p.m., Commander Dao Din Lian informed Command Center B-8 of strategic intelligence from the Air Defense Air Force Command, indicating that at 8:45 p.m., B-52s would be operating 60 kilometers north of Saipan, Laos. Deputy Commander Tran Man ordered Command Center B-8 to raise its alert level to Level 1 and activate 3 radar stations, C-41, C-37, and C-45. By 8:25 p.m., all 3 radar stations were functioning well. At 8:30 p.m., pilot VU Dinh Rang was placed on alert. By 8:40 p.m., VU Dinh Rang took off, flying solo according to the pre-prepared plan from the airport to the Tan AP area. At 8:45 p.m., based on an assessment of the positional relationship between Rang's MiG and the B-52 formation, the guidance team at Command Center B-8 determined that it was entirely feasible to direct pilot VU Dinh Rang to engage the B-52s before they reached Route 20 to bomb their targets. At 8:49 p.m., for the first time, the Command Center established radio contact with the pilot and instructed him to turn sharply to a heading of 230 degrees, maintaining a speed of 900 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 3,000 meters. By 2052, Command Center B-8 ordered the pilot to jettison his external fuel tanks and increase his speed to 950 kilometers per hour on a course of 160 degrees. By 2054, the Command Center informed a target ahead at a distance of 60 kilometers, commanding the pilot to increase altitude to 10,000 meters while switching to visual guidance and continuously updating the pilot with target parameters. At 2055, Command Center B-8 informed the pilot of a target located 30 degrees to his right at a distance of 25 kilometers, instructing him to turn left toward a heading of 90 degrees. Upon reaching a distance of 15 kilometers, the pilot was directed to activate the onboard radar.
Out the Copper 1's co-pilot was inexperienced. USAF GCI tracked the MiG and tried to warn us of the problems that were about to happen. He and his pilot did not immediately recognize what we were briefed at, the divert word. Now, the divert word is a word that you are all briefed with in the pre-mission briefing. If you hear this word over the radio, any radio, you will stop the bomb run and you will immediately initiate a turn away from the threat, in this case, a right-hand turn, and you will exit the target area. And that word for the night was snowblind, because it took about 45 seconds from the time a Red Crown, our GCI, transmitted it till the time he actually did anything about it.
Immediately after activating the radar, pilot VU Dinh Rang spotted 3 B-52s in a triangular formation at a distance of 11 kilometers. When the distance closed to 8 kilometers, Command Center B-8 commanded pilot to accelerate to Mach 1.3, over 1,400 kilometers per hour, and selected the first B-52 as his target. However, Pilot Rang recounted a different story than what was presented in the history of the Vietnam Air Force. He noted that he spotted 3 targets, but the first one was too close for him to adjust his aim in time. Consequently, he chose to fly past it and set his sights on the second target instead.
Here's the key. He used his AI radar sparingly and was undetected by our electronic warfare operators. What that meant was that no one in our cell saw him coming, because his aircraft at night pointed directly at our gunner is a very, very small target. And while it's not stealthy, it cannot be seen naked eye. And our number 3 gunner, who may have seen it, did not recognize this as a threat. And our electronic warfare officers never reported any airborne intercept radar signals.
According to the book History of the 921st Air Regiment, The MiG-21 was accurately guided, and the pilot continuously received updates on the situation. Ground control ordered VU Dinh Rang to ascend to an altitude of 10,000 meters, drop his external fuel tank, and accelerate past the escorting F-4s toward the group of B-52s in front of him. The missile indicated a good lock on the target. VU Dinh Rang stabilized the aircraft and fired a missile before pulling up and turning sharply to the right. Upon leveling, Rang spotted another B-52 with 2 lights on its wing. Checking his radar, target was at a distance of 3 kilometers. Rang decided to engage it. Once his targeting point stabilized, he launched his second missile and immediately pulled up to the right while reporting his egress back to Command Center B-8.
Because there was a delay in our maneuvers, we began our turn late. And when we began our turn, he had to then keep up with us and turn with us. And that is probably what saved us. His aircraft is not maneuverable at high altitude. And the missile is even less maneuverable at high altitude. So when he was in the turn and he launched the missile, the people that know about this missile have told me that the missile probably failed the track properly, and that's why it missed us.
VU Dinh Rang told me on February 7, 2022, that he fired the second missile after stabilizing the aircraft. He did not fire while turning to keep up with the target.
It went past our aircraft and it exploded as it was going by. And that explosion collapsed the outer wing tank right here on the tail cone. A lot of noise, loud bang, bright flash, and we all kind of looked at each other and said, "What the heck was that?" And because we were almost all the way through our turn, we were almost rolled out. We had set up a 90-degree turn with 45 degrees of bank, and I'm also looking at the 8 gauges, and I looked at the 8 gauges, and everything's working fine. So I look out my right-hand window, and here is a bright blue. I call it like a cornflower blue. It's lighter than navy blue. It's bright, beautiful, bright blue flame, and it's pointed straight up. And the aircraft that is dragging it is going straight down. That was Colonel Rang. He was doing a split S maneuver.
The Command Center B-8 directed him to egress to a heading of 330 degrees, descend to an altitude of 4,000 meters upon crossing the border. The airfield unit turned on the runway lights and illuminated the east end of the runway with 2 truck spotlights to assist the pilot in identifying his landing touchdown zone. Rang safely landed at Quan Lang Airfield B4 at 21:15 hours. As soon as he exited the cockpit, the pilot requested the airport to turn off the lights, suspecting that enemy forces were in pursuit. Sure enough, moments later, he heard the unmistakable sound of enemy aircraft flying overhead. This encounter marked a significant moment in aerial warfare during the Vietnam War. It was not just a battle of machines, but a clash of tactics and resolve. The MiG-21s faced overwhelming odds against the might of U.S. air power, yet they showcased their capabilities in this high-stakes confrontation.
Rang, meanwhile, landed at his base, directed the control tower to immediately extinguish all airport lights because he thought he would be followed to his airport and his airport would be bombed immediately. No. They'd missed him completely. He was gone. He was come and gone. And our MiG-cap aircraft, they had followed us, not him.
The VPAF asserted that the bombers were compelled to abandon their attack on ground targets. Later, it was revealed that a B-52 had been hit and damaged, preventing it from returning to its home airbase and forcing it to make an emergency landing. It could not be repaired for flight and had to be written off to cover up its loss. In fact, the B-52 group continued its mission, bombing a secondary target before returning to U Dapao Air Base to land. The aircraft only suffered damage to its left external wing tank. This marked the first time in history that the invincible flying fortress was attacked by a MiG-21 and struck by air-to-air missiles. This battle served as a valuable lesson for everyone, from command centers to officers, aiding pilots in developing strategies to approach and shoot down B-52s in the future. During a review of the battle at Anh Son Airfield, VPAF Deputy Commander Tran Man concluded, 1. The night battle on November 20th was an exemplary engagement in terms of command organization and ground support, with Command Center B-8 having learned from the interception failure in October 1971. 2. The VPAF successfully studied interception tactics and created a high degree of surprise, preventing the USAF from responding during the 30 minutes of the battle. 3. The C-41 GCI guiding radar unit effectively detected both MiG-21 and B-52 targets, ensuring continuous and accurate guidance. 4. Communication between units was seamless, strictly adhering to all regulations without detection by USAF signal intelligence. 5. Ground logistics at Anh Son Airfield were well managed with no significant errors, facilitating the success of the operation. 6. The pilot made considerable efforts in preparing for the flight. In the initial phase, he correctly executed the requirement to fly along the designated route and altitude as outlined in the plan, flying at low altitude over a distance of 120 kilometers in dark conditions across complex mountainous terrain in Region 4. The flight path was near the Dai Hu Mountain Range, Nayeon, and the Truong Sun Range, Ha Tin. During the navigation phase for climbing and engaging with the enemy, the pilot accurately followed all commands from ground control. He utilized onboard radar and launched the first missile under favorable conditions. 7. Conclusion. The first missile successfully hit the B-52, while the second missile missed due to relatively high G-forces as the MiG was turning. Despite these conclusions about the battle, after the night of November 20th, 1971, some individuals, including leaders and commanders, questioned pilot VU Dinh Rang's performance and morale due to insufficient information. They suspected that he had wavering thoughts. This suspicion weighed heavily on VU Dinh Rang's mind for many years afterward.